Hello and welcome to everyone tuning in. Over the next hour or so, we are going to introduce you to the Nature Trust, a new not-for-profit alliance between business and forestry to tackle the climate and biodiversity crisis. We're going to explain to you what the Nature Trust is, why you might like to get involved and how you can get involved. But first we'll introduce you to our panel. We have John Beckett. John is founder of Forestry Partners and chairman of the Nature Trust. Over on the other side of our panel, Kieran Fallon. Kieran is director of Coillte Nature and managing director of Nature Trust. Beside Kieran, we have Antoinette MacDonald, customer and marketing director with AXA Insurance Ireland, and Professor Yvonne Buckley, Professor of Zoology at Trinity College and very recently named as Trinity's first ever Vice President for Biodiversity and Climate Action. Congratulations on your new title and your new role, Yvonne. Thanks. Whether we address you as President or will plain old Yvonne do?
Plain old Yvonne will be fine.
Before we get into the discussion about Nature Trust, the first thing we're going to do is play a little video for you to explain what Nature Trust is.
It's hard to believe, but once most of Ireland looked like this. Today, less than 2% is under native woodland. We're in the midst of a worsening climate and biodiversity emergency.
It's time to reprioritise, to reroute, to regrow. It's time to reforest Ireland. The Nature Trust is an Irish not-for-profit with a vision for the future where nature thrives. To help make it happen, we're planting new native woodlands in communities all across the country, and we need your help.
We take care of the entire forest management process, from seed to canopy. All our wildwoods start live as seeds on the forest floor of Ireland's old native woodlands. Seeds are collected in the autumn, then they're transported to our nurseries where they're sorted and dried. The seeds are sown either in polytunnels or out in the field, where they grow first into seedlings and then into saplings. Once the saplings are 2 to 3 years old, they're taken out to new native woodland sites and planted, and everyone can get involved. We maintain the fences to keep grazing animals out, protect against invasive species, and manage tracks and trails so that everyone can enjoy them. Over time, these wildwoods will develop into a valuable habitat for nature that sequesters and stores carbon and becomes a recreational amenity for local communities. The impact they create will be independently verified to international standards, giving our partners confidence in reporting on carbon, biodiversity, well-being and engagement values that our woodlands provide.
We have a plan to create real impact through large-scale nature-based solutions. It's ambitious, it's bold, and it's scalable. So we're calling on businesses, investors, philanthropists and crowd funds who share our vision to join us and help to plant the right trees in the right place with the right management for the climate, for nature and for people.
Together, we can turn our vision for a future where nature thrives into reality.
And just to let you know, if any of you do have any questions at any stage during this session, you can type them into the question bar below the live stream. They'll come to us and we'll do our best to put as many of them to the panel as possible. John, pardon the pun, but that video was kind of it in a nutshell. You said you plan to reforest Ireland. It is ambitious. Why do you want to reforest Ireland?
Well, my background is actually in the tech sector and my day job is still in the tech sector. And a few years ago, we sat down as a team and we said, well, what can we do to contribute positively to the climate and biodiversity crises that are happening? Because there's so much talent in the tech sector, there's so much money in the tech sector that it's, it seems like a good place to start for us to see what can we do as a community. So we started looking first at what is available in the market, what are the options. So we looked at various different things, tree planting all over the world, and we couldn't get comfort over the veracity of or the quality of these projects that we examined. So we asked ourselves, well, what would this look like if we did it ourselves? So very naively, perhaps, we said this is just going to involve acquiring some land and some saplings and planting them, but it's actually significantly more complicated than that. So we went through a very steep learning curve to understand what's involved in the process. And during that learning curve, we found out that the level of forestry cover in Ireland is the lowest in Europe at about 11%, and the native woodland cover in Ireland is again the lowest in Europe at less than 2%. So it seemed that there was a huge, if you excuse the pun again, low-hanging fruit for us to kind of approach this challenge. And then once we had established what is actually involved in this, in establishing native woodland, we created a scheme on gocarbonneutral.ie to help others leverage the learning curve that we had gone through, so that they could contribute to that as well.
So what you wanted didn't exist, so you kind of decided to create it. And a daunting enough task, considering that you had no background in the area. And I presume that's where you kind of discovered that Coillte could be good bed partners for you.
Well, absolutely. And when we originally set up and we got established and we started working with some partners to establish the forest, I got in touch with Kieran, and we established that what we're trying to do with Coillte Nature is exactly aligned. Our values are aligned, our objectives are aligned. We're both doing this on a not-for-profit basis. So we said, well, look, let's bring all of the talent that we have together and see what we can do to scale up our ambitions a little bit more.
And Kieran, when you were approached by John, did you think it was possible to do what he wanted to do?
Yeah, we actually we formed Coillte Nature 2 years ago in 2019, and Coillte has been around since 1989. So the organisation was looking back at its past and looking forward to the future. And while some great work had been done on biodiversity within the organisation, we felt that if we created a specific wing of the company that was not for profit, we could really deliver on some really large projects at scale. So we set ourselves the task of looking at three things. One was around ecosystem restoration projects and major biodiversity projects. We have some wonderful projects underway and some great projects coming down the line next year with the National Parks and Wildlife Service. Doing urban forests, which are the conversion of timber forests that were planted close to large urban centres, but as these centres have expanded and they've become, important recreational assets, their amenity value has really increased. So the Dublin Mountains conversion is a big project we're working on. And then the final thing was around this native woodland creation. And when Coillte Nature was announced, there was a strong positive reaction. And I got a steady stream of inquiries from individuals and organisations who were interested in getting associated with the creation of forests. And their motives were really good, and the level of commitment they could bring to it was sufficient to really make an impact, because it's a major capital exercise. So initially we had nothing to plug into, but when we engaged with these organisations, we found what they wanted was to really make an impact at scale, but not necessarily own forests, because there's issues associated with forest health, for instance, and the liability associated with having people on your land. But they wanted to put the forest in a place where they could be sure that it'd be managed well into the future. So it was through those conversations I came into contact with John and learned about the amazing work that he had pioneered with Forestry Partners. And as John said, we realised our values and our ambitions were very closely aligned, and we were finishing each other's sentences. Initially we said we work together to support each other, and then over time we realised we should join forces, and really we could maximise the impact by doing that.
So to explain in simple terms then, what does the Nature Trust do? So if people are investing in the Nature Trust, what happens to their investment?
It's really, really simple. We combine private finance with publicly available incentives for creating native woodlands. Native woodlands take a long time to grow and mature, so there's not a conventional economic argument for them. So the state incentivises the creation of native woodlands through grants and premia, which are run part of the forestry programme, which is administered by the Department of Agriculture. So we combine that with the private funding, and we go out and we buy land, and we plant that land with native trees, and we manage that land in perpetuity. Now, we don't just buy any land. We're really fortunate to have a an excellent head ecologist, Dr. Declan Little, who's very well known in forestry circles in Ireland, a forest soils ecologist, and he ran Woodlands of Ireland for 20 years. So Declan is now our head ecologist, and he visits every single site. He does soil samples, assesses the vegetation of the site, and decides whether this is a good candidate for the Nature Trust, and then specifies the kind of native woodland that we should create on that site.
There's a geographical spread as well, so this is, these eventually will be dotted all over the country, and there is a practical reason for that, Kieran.
Yeah, I mean, we buy land on the open market as it becomes available. So as land arrives in parcels, we look at it as candidate land and we buy it. So we're open to all sizes of land. Ideally, things above 10 hectares because there's a scalability here. As I said, the whole idea here is to do projects of scale. But we look at all land as it becomes available. But there is a practicality from the point of view of investment, because all your native woodland assets are dispersed. So you have a good kind of portfolio spread of assets. And also, as I think John may have mentioned, all these woods are going to be open as a public amenity in the future. So it means we can open them across the country and provide resources in many communities rather than concentrated in a small number. And
that's something, John, I know you're passionate about the environmental aspect and the benefits of that, but the social benefits are hugely important too, aren't they, to you?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's another reason when we started looking at what we should do as a community, a business community, we looked at the benefits to the country from a holistic perspective. So there's carbon sequestration, there is biodiversity restoration, there is social and community benefits. There's also employment benefits by keeping this work in the country. You're seeing opportunities for forest management and creation jobs there as well. Even things like fence management and that kind of thing. But also then you have the likes of working with students and bringing educational institutions in to get involved in the projects, because it's very unusual that a project of this scale and of this type would have students involved from the very beginning, at the outset of a project, before it was even planted, right through to perhaps 100 years' time. It'll obviously be different students, but involved in that project and watching it, seeing how things evolve, and also seeing how the change in climate impacts these projects and what we can learn and do as a result of that as well.
And you touched on managing these projects, which will be a big job, and we've got another video to play to you now, just I suppose how Nature Trust works and the management and work that goes into keeping it going.
The Nature Trust is an Irish not-for-profit, backed by Quilcha and forestry partners, creating new native woodlands at scale right across Ireland. Today, we're going to show you how we go about preparing and planting a new Nature Trust woodland to benefit people, nature and climate. We're working with the team at SWS Forestry to plant this site in County Longford. All our sites are carefully selected by our ecologist, who walks the site and assesses the soils and site characteristics to determine the most suitable combination of native species to plant. On this site, we're planting a range of species such as oak, hazel, birch, hawthorn and alder. We use native planting stock, grown from seed collected each year from native Irish woodlands and grown at Quilcha's nurseries to ensure the quality and provenance of the plants. We work with the land and keep as much of the natural areas of biodiversity intact as possible, such as hedgerows and areas of scrub. We don't drain the land or use any fertiliser, as we're mimicking what would happen if the site was to regenerate naturally with native woodland. We put up fencing to protect the site from stray livestock and from wild animals such as deer or hares that like to eat young trees. In time, this area will look radically different. It will be a beautiful, mature native woodland, home to a rich array of plants such as wood anemone and bluebell, as well as birds and animals like red squirrel and pine marten. Once the trees start to mature, this woodland will be open as a public amenity for the local community to enjoy. And of course, the trees will sequester and store carbon into the future. So, when you invest in the Nature Trust, you can take pride in the role you're playing to address the climate and biodiversity crisis and the creation of new native Irish woodlands. Find out more today at naturetrust.ie.
So the climate and biodiversity crisis is what it all comes back to. And Yvonne, it's almost become a word that's lost its meaning in a way, biodiversity. We hear it all the time. What is biodiversity and why should we be so concerned about the state it's in at the moment?
Yeah, it's great to be talking about biodiversity when in the context of native woodland and afforestation planting here in Ireland. In its most simplest form, biodiversity is just the variety of life in an area on the planet. And that can be, genetic diversity between different individuals of the same species, all the ways up to differences between species and differences between different kinds of species. And it's all the animals, plants and fungi that create healthy ecosystems. And native biodiversity are the species that are native to Ireland, so have been here for a very long time, and that have co-evolved together. So they have these strong links between each other. They form healthy, connected ecosystems. And one of the great benefits of having healthy ecosystems is they provide loads of services to us. Things like water regulation, nutrient regulation, aside from biodiversity being, fantastic in and of itself, it provides lots of ecosystem services to us.
So a properly managed native woodland would make a huge difference then, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, as John said earlier, the native woodland in Ireland used to be covered in native woodland, and it's just been, decimated, I suppose, through the centuries. And it would be fantastic to get some of that native woodland back into the country. And it would provide habitat for so many of our great native animals, things like pine marten and red squirrels, and native deer species, as well as the little things that matter as well, the insects and the microbes that make healthy soils and that help to decompose all of the dead leaves and help to regulate all of our nutrients.
And it's something that Kieran touched on when it comes to finding the right site. It is about the right site and the right tree or the right thing in the right place, isn't it?
Absolutely. And some areas may not be suitable for planting woodlands. So being able to identify what the biodiversity potential is in a particular area is quite important. Not all sites will be able to hold the same kinds of species. So if you can identify what a site has the potential to achieve, and then you can figure out what the actions, the restoration actions are that you need to put in place in order to bring that site up to the quality that would provide for the best kind of biodiversity that could be there. That's the challenge in a way. And governments around the world have committed just this week in the Kunming Biodiversity Declaration to restoring and protecting more biodiversity on the face of the planet. There's really strong commitment now, or an understanding that biodiversity is threatened worldwide and here in Ireland, and that we really need to up our game in terms of what we do to restore it.
And that's something actually then that I know you've started the Nature Trust with native woodlands, but it doesn't always have to be native woodlands, does it, Kieran?
No, the Nature Trust has been set up to acquire land and improve the ecological quality of the land. So the project we're speaking about today involves the purchase of bare land where it's suitable, and there may be cases where it's not suitable, to grow native woodlands. But we're also really interested in wider biodiversity improvement projects, so work on peatlands and other habitats. So it doesn't necessarily involve trees. It's about the improvement of the ecosystem services from any land, any degraded land.
The one thing that the Nature Trust needs are obviously investors, and I've got one of your first investors, Antoinette from AXA Ireland, here beside me. Antoinette, AXA have invested quite big. You've put a lot of money into the Nature Trust.
We have. This is the first, hopefully, a tranche of investment in the Nature Trust. We do hope to invest in future phases. Actually, the 2 million is part that we've invested in the Nature Trust. It's actually part of a wider 6 million investment that we're making this year. And we're doing that because, the global AXA purpose is to act for human progress by protecting what matters. Now, what matters more than our planet. So the time to act is now. We believe in collective action. So individuals have to take responsibility and make personal choices and changes in response to climate. Government action, there's clear action required from government, but also businesses have a role to play. And really large-scale businesses like AXA can access experts and can fund large-scale endeavours on behalf of our customers to support future biodiversity and climate change for many generations to come. And that's probably the role, one of the key roles of business. And that's why we're stepping forward, as well as signing up to lots of other great initiatives like the Net Zero Alliance. But this is about making a difference for climate in Ireland.
And why the Nature Trust, Antoinette?
Well, I mean, after what you've heard today, Helen, I mean, it's very clear. I'll be honest, we looked at a lot of initiatives, and it touches on what John said earlier. It's really important that it's the right initiative with the right funding and the right expertise. So actually what attracted us to the Nature Trust and to Coillte Nature was their values. And it's really, this is a long-term partnership and it's a long-term commitment.
And John, I know you had mentioned, we'd spoken earlier, that you're quite particular about the kind of companies you want to work with as well, that the integrity of the Nature Trust is important to you. So what kind of investors are you looking to get involved with?
Well, the credibility of what we're doing is absolutely central. So maintaining the brand image that we have and how hard we've worked to build a scheme that is fundamentally as credible as it possibly can be. And what we're hoping is it's going to be a beacon of how projects should be run internationally. So to look at again when we started this, where we were when I started my journey in kind of exploring this as an idea, we looked for credible options, if you like. And what we've discovered is any project needs to be additional in that it wouldn't have happened anyway. It needs to be permanent and it needs to be verifiable. And there is a major concern internationally over projects that claim to be all three of those, but perhaps are not. So if you invest in a project in the developing world, are you absolutely sure that it's going to be there in 20 years? And if it's not there, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to go down and try and find out who cut down your trees? Obviously you're not. So the additionality, meaning that we can be absolutely sure that this project wouldn't have happened anyway, is key. So even where you have international standards like the gold standard, which are kind of standing over or are certifying projects, there was a report out at the start of the year from Berkeley in California with Carbon Plan, which detailed 85% of the projects, the gold standard projects that they had looked at, were not actually additional, meaning they would have happened even without the funding that the partners, the carbon partners had provided. So that's obviously meaningless. So this idea of greenwashing, to get back to your question, this idea of greenwashing is really damaging. So we are not interested in working with companies who are purely looking to undertake a marketing exercise and to leverage our brand to engage in that marketing exercise. We have worked really hard to build and ensure the credibility of this is beyond reproach, and we can ask, we can answer the difficult questions around that. So we want to make sure that any brands that are interested in working with us kind of align with our own thinking and our own values as well.
So Antoinette, I suppose if it is about, if it's not about offsetting a non-changing carbon footprint, what else are AXA doing, as well as investing in the likes of Nature Trust, to change and to reduce your carbon footprint? What else are AXA doing?
But there's a range of initiatives. One actually key thing, Helen, is actually making people aware of what their carbon footprint is. So we've developed a really simple carbon calculator for our customers and for anybody to use through all of our websites, and we're promoting it simple. Just put in your registration number and the vehicle and the average kilometres that you drive, and we'll calculate your estimated carbon footprint. There's been great engagement because so many people are unaware of the impact of their driving. That makes them make choices about how they use their car. And in time to come, as we know many consumers plan to change to transition to cleaner energy vehicles, it makes those choices also more important.
And I think yep. that's a really important point there, Antoinette. Like the raising the awareness for people is key. Because if people aren't aware of this, it seems, a lot of people are very interested in this, but the concept of offsetting in and of itself is problematic for a number of reasons. So, for example, it can take 50 years for a forest that we plant to mature and to sequester carbon. So it takes 5 minutes to drive down the road and burn some petrol or diesel. So it's taking you decades potentially to undo the damage that you're doing. So offsetting in and of itself is very useful as a transition and as an awareness building exercise, because people need to understand that as I drive, I create these emissions, and offsetting is going to take a lot longer than we want to undo that. But once people are aware, they can make informed decisions around what they're going to buy next. Maybe they cycle next time, maybe they take public transport or whatever. So it's important to look at the balance there of what we're trying to do.
And if we stick with the integrity of it, obviously the scientific integrity of it is hugely important as well. And Yvonne, you're chair of the scientific panel with the Nature Trust. So what's your role within that? What will the scientific panel be doing?
Well, the plan is with the scientific advisory panel is to think about ways that we can help the Nature Trust to monitor and verify exactly what they're doing. So measuring carbon is problematic in itself, and there's a whole pile of science behind that can be brought to bear. But measuring the biodiversity benefits is trickier again, because you really need to have a clear idea of what it is you're trying to achieve with your restoration project, what's possible, and what your management interventions, which direction your management interventions take you in order to achieve the biodiversity benefits that you want to get. And as John and Kieran have said, the integrity of this is really, really important. So we want to work with, I'm delighted that they want to work with scientists to kind of underpin the verification processes that they're going to have to put in place here.
And I mean, by their nature, trees grow slowly, and the climate will change more rapidly than the trees are going. So I'd imagine the scientific needs and wants and the way you measure things will change as the forests mature.
Absolutely. We're already seeing biodiversity respond to climate change. So we're seeing new species coming into Ireland that haven't been here before, that are following, the changing climate. And we're seeing species that were commonly found here, getting more restricted in their range. So the way that biodiversity is structured over the countryside is changing. And as this continues, our restoration practices might have to change too. So a forest or a woodland type that's very suitable in a certain place today, that place may be unsuitable for it in 20 years' time or 50 years' time or 100 years' time. So it's really important that the restoration practices keep up with how climate and biodiversity changes around what we want to do. So I think continued engagement with ecologists and social scientists around the benefits that we can get from these restoration projects will be really necessary.
I was just going to ask one thing. You seem excited about it, Yvonne. Does the prospect of a project like this excite you?
Restoration at scale is very, very exciting. Being able to put native woodlands back into places where they used to occur. People talk about rewilding, and it means different things to different people, but ultimately we're all trying to get to the same end, which is, native woodlands as they were, maybe 100, 200 years ago, but there may be differences. They may not be exactly the same as they were hundreds of years ago. They may be native with a twist, or, not quite the same as the past, but with a twist. We're, looking to create woodlands that will support biodiversity going forward into the future.
Sorry, Kieran, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, in addition to the strategic advice that Yvonne has kindly agreed to give us, I also think there's a real opportunity to make these a living lab, a huge living lab. And as John was saying, native woodlands that we plant today begin to mature in the middle of the century. Can be reproductive for 100 years. So, there's a really great opportunity to do really longitudinal studies that generations of students will follow through on. So it's one of the kind of, I think, the nice human aspects of this, the potential for real life research on the ground, but also for, less formal study and experience, like giving people opportunities just to be out in nature. I attended a Mental Health Ireland event last week. We were talking about woodland walks, and we all know when we go to walk in a woodland we feel better afterwards for some reason, but this has now been measured, and people have studied this and can quantify the benefits from experiencing nature. And during COVID, actually, during our periods of a really intense lockdown, when we were stuck in our homes and had rare opportunities to recreate, we noticed that the visits to our forests really skyrocketed.
So we walked places we never walked before.
We certainly did, yeah. Our close to where our studio is today is Ticknock Mountain. Ticknock has more visitor numbers than our 12 forest parks combined. Wow. And went up by a factor of, I think, over 3 during the lockdown.
So by living lab then, if any of the panel want to take it, do you mean, as well as, I suppose, families and people using it recreationally, that students will come there to learn and to study? Is that something?
There's all kinds of levels that research can happen on. I mean, we have a great increase in citizen science projects going on at the moment, and that, that could be one of the things that we might want to engage you with, to talk about how people visiting these sites might actually be able to record biodiversity, submit it to our National Biodiversity Centre, and then students might be able to analyse those data that citizens visiting the sites have collected. There's all kinds of opportunities here. And then we have, primary school, secondary school students could make use of these areas, looking at different restoration ages, to look at how biodiversity develops through time, because there'll continue to be new plantings and there'll be older plantings, and you can see how biodiversity develops through time. And that, for me as an ecologist, that is super exciting, because I'm really interested in how birds, mammals, insects, plants colonize. Plant trees, but then lots of other species will start to colonize these woodlands, and we can figure out what are the drivers of those colonization processes. Is it because there's another native woodland close by? Is it because it's connected with a hedgerow to another woodland, down the road? Those kinds of corridors throughout the landscape can help biodiversity to spread and colonize right the ways through. So you can imagine our trees and woodlands and hedgerows like the green arteries of the country. And by putting in more of these native woodlands, we're connecting up those arteries, and we're allowing the biodiversity to flow around the countryside, and it'll be of benefit, to places that aren't even, part of the restoration project.
And Antoinette, for the investment that AXA made, that work has started already. So does it make a difference? Because very often when portfolios are acquired, you can't see them and you can't touch them. Does it make a difference that physically, I suppose, woodland has been planted and you can visit it and you can see it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a significant part of this. We actually consulted our customers in terms of their views on climate change, what actions they expected us to take, and what our role and purpose would be. And it was really interesting, actually. 60% of our customers are actually beginning to become aware of their carbon footprint and beginning to take action in regard to that. Over 3 in 4 of them wanted us to take action as part of our business role. But the thing that really engaged them, Helen, was doing something which would make a difference here locally in Ireland, that they could actually engage in, that they could participate in. So I think that amenity value just can't be underestimated as well.
And as you said, that was the first tranche of investment.
Yes.
So you have a big handbag, Antoinette. You're planning on investing more in the Nature Trust?
Yes, hoping to invest in future phases. As I said, it's really about long-term partnership. It's about values, and the kind of governance oversight and the verifiable nature of everything that's happening here, and the potential impact on communities. It's definitely a partnership we want to invest more in.
And speaking of governance, Kieran, large-scale investments, which is what you're hoping to get, how can people be assured that their money is being properly managed?
Well, KPMG actually did assurance on the first round of investments very kindly to us on a pro bono basis, which was a wonderful contribution. We'll have, it's a not-for-profit CLG. Our ambition in the fullness of time is to apply for charitable status, so it'll give it additional oversight, and we'll have an independent board to make sure it's all the finances are being well handled. But it is all the investment is invested in acquiring land, upgrading that land, doing necessary remedial works, and maintaining it into the future. And any surplus is returned into purchasing more land. So that is really all we're trying to do, is maximise the amount of land and the quality of the upgrades we do to that land.
I have a question that has come in from the audience, and it's for you, Kieran, that who owns the woodlands once they're planted?
The Nature Trust. So the Nature Trust is a CLG, it's a company limited by guarantee, and it will hold the assets. And the people who invest will get reports on their proportion of their investment into those assets. So in our first case, we had a €2 million issue, and we'd expected to have a number of investors, but AXA came in and took the entire first issue. So all of those 200 hectares, it's a very large area of land, are assigned to AXA, and we have an inventory and a registry so that everyone can tell where the land is, the folio numbers, and who the owners or who the funders of those lands are. But the actual lands are held by the company, and the company has been set up with a constitution that ensures it is there for a very narrow range of activities, these charitable activities. And as part of setting up an organisation like that, you have to specify what would happen in the event the organisation was to be wound up. And in our case, it's to pass on those lands to another organisation with a similar ethos. So it could be an NGO or a state entity that would manage those lands into the future.
Okay. Another question has come in for you, Yvonne, that is natural rewilding not a more efficient and cost-effective way to restore natural forests? But I suppose we're not talking about restoring native woodlands, we're talking about creating new ones here.
It's a mixture of the two. Well, okay, so natural passive rewilding is where you just lock up a piece of land and you let nature do its thing. Sometimes that can work if there are sources of native species close by that can colonize that piece of land naturally. That can work. However, it doesn't always work that way. You can get invasive species, things like rhododendron and gunnera coming in. You may not get the result you're actually looking for. You may end up with a piece of land that's even more degraded than when you started. So I think it's important to take a broad view of restoration and think about what kinds of activities, what kinds of management, including tree planting, can be undertaken at the start to put it on the track in which you want it to go on. And our vision for what we want at the end of that will be different depending on where that woodland is. And the exact mix of species we're aiming for will be different depending on where it is and what's possible in that area. And being able to nudge it along the right path, I think, is quite important. But certainly we would expect native species to colonize those planted areas in weird and wonderful ways as the projects mature. And that's a really important part of it. So there will be an element of rewilding because nature will get in there and do its own thing. But the initial planting, I think, and the initial vision for what kinds of biodiversity we want at that site, I think, is important.
Our levels of native woodland are so low, as John and Yvonne said. Very often it's a case of a viable seed source. So, but if you find a site and there is a native woodland beside it, we are open to the idea of natural rewilding, as your questioner has suggested.
There are some great questions coming in, actually. There's another one that, what's the potential? So how much land can Nature Trust plant in, say, over a decade? I mean, what are the limitations of what you can?
Well, our constraints are finances, okay, but we've had a great first round, and there's a lot of interest. People are very interested, and it's very encouraging. So finances are one thing. The other thing is land availability. There are something around 15,000 hectares of land are traded annually in Ireland, so there's a limit on the amount of land. And as I said in our opening, we're looking for suitable lands. So look, we want to get to a point. The climate and biodiversity crisis is real, and we want to address it at a meaningful level, at a substantial, scalable level. And we're starting off with this 200 hectares. We'd like to move very quickly to 300 and then to 500. And then just let's see how land availability develops within the country. There is a review that I know Minister Ryan is looking at the moment around land use, and that may free up more opportunities. But the constraint is land availability.
The other constraint, the licensing issue, the forestry licensing issue, is a huge constraint, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Some of our viewers may be following this in the newspapers, where it's receiving a lot of column inches. The forestry system has a consenting system that's I suppose analogous to the planning system, and that's there for afforestation, so the planting of new forests, the felling of trees over a certain size, and the building of roads to extract that timber. So for I think really about 18 months now, it's been very, very problematic, and real issues with the consent system. Minister Hackett actually is running a root and branch reform of the forest policy at the moment called Project Woodland, and that includes a review of the regulatory system. So we hope that will open this up in the new year. There has been some improvement in felling licenses actually more recently, and I understand attention has been turned to afforestation. For this round, we've protected ourselves by, where possible, buying land that is pre-consented. So we bought land with native woodland consent on it already to allow us to get cracking. The planting season of native woodlands is in the winter, so it starts around November and runs through April when the soil is cold and the plants are dormant. So we have enough consented land to get cracking this winter, and then we will during the next year acquire the residual land and have consents to finish out the planting next year.
John, I have a question I might put to you. I don't know whether it's a question you'll want to answer or not. Or does the panel see a role for government to introduce conservation tax easements to incentivise landowners to provide land to Nature Trust in perpetuity? So kind of if the government can incentivise it a little bit too.
Yeah, look, I think any incentives that can be drawn up that can encourage people to make better use of the land assets that they have is to be welcomed. I'm not going to. I'm not a tax expert, but I would. So I would defer to somebody who knows more than me. But I think what is certainly needed is an increased focus on actions that can have an on the ground result. So we're very good at talking about doing things, and we're maybe slower to get things done. And I think it's going to shock everybody just how much climate change it's coming at us like a train, and the people's reliance on what they've seen over the last 20 years isn't a good guide to what's going to happen over the next 20. So I think you're going to see. I'm excited about what's going to come out of COP26 next month. I think you're going to see more and more attention to different incentives that can be introduced. So absolutely, if there's something that can aid our mission here, then that's great.
Kieran, another question for you. What recognised standard is being used to verify the carbon sequestration amounts purchased by investors?
The UK Woodland Carbon Code. So the Forestry Commission in Britain developed a code, I'm going to say 4 years ago, and it's an excellent standard. We've worked closely with them in the last year on this, and we would propose using that for our carbon offsets, our carbon audits, at least initially. If an local Irish standard or European standard emerges, we may transition to that. Teagasc have done some really interesting work on Irish or Republic of Ireland land earlier this year, and running the numbers through that tool, it correlates very closely with the UK standard, which is not surprising because we have a very similar natural environment, and it's used in Northern Ireland.
It is important, though, that we look to standardise this, because the Woodland Carbon Code, while very useful, is based on UK legislation. So we're actually working with partners at the moment to develop and look at the development of a suitable Irish standard. Again, it's not rocket science. It's just a case of getting it done. So we would hope to have that done in the not too distant future.
I think it's important to call out, though, John, that this is the first of these woodland carbon codes established in Ireland, isn't that correct?
So we can't, because it's a UK scheme, we can't actually register with the UK Carbon Code, but we can follow the guidelines and the rules effectively around that. And there are also very good Irish standards which we're following. So Kieran will be able to speak much more comprehensively about this than I. But the Forest Service guidelines that we follow, the approval process that we need to go through with each site that we're looking at planting. And then the alignment with EU taxonomy, and that we're also guaranteeing with these projects. It's all relevant.
And we touched on, so AXA took the first offering. Where are we with other offerings, and what stage are we at?
So the first round was oversubscribed, which was fantastic, and thanks to AXA for making that the case. But we're now launching a second €5 million fund, and that's open now, and it's partially subscribed, and we'd hope to close that soon. So we would certainly encourage anybody who's interested in participating to get in touch or visit our website on naturetrust.ie, which is a good place to start, and we can share documentation with anybody who's interested.
If you were doing, what do they call it, the pitch you can do in a lift, if you can pitch something to people, quite briefly, why should people invest in the Nature Trust?
I think it boils down to credibility. So if companies are looking for a credible, reliable, Irish-based project that can have a meaningful impact, that they can be genuinely associated with, they can visit, they can help with the planting if they want to, they can really genuinely get hands-on and literally get their feet dirty. This is the project, right? It's not for profit. We're not taking any commercial incentive or margin on any of the projects that we work on. This is all about a community project to help Ireland improve our performance. Ireland has been a laggard typically for the last number of years in climate change performance, and that's internationally recognised. The Climate Change Performance Index has ranked us as low. We're slowly climbing the rankings there. But this is a project that can meaningfully help. We have significant challenges around agriculture and forestry in all of the rankings that these are areas that are called out. So we're trying to do something good that has no losers. This is a win-win for everybody, and so anybody who's interested in participating in that and having their brand associated with that should get in touch.
And Kieran, as John said, that Ireland, we are a laggard when it comes to how much land is planted in forestry and native woodlands. Could something like Nature Trust, could the scale be there to address that in a substantial way?
It could be. I mean, we're bottom of the European table. I mean, the European average is 37% of land area in the EU27 is forested.
And we are?
11, just over 11. So very low. Having said that, when the state was formed roughly 100 years ago, it was down at 0.5%. So, within 100 years, it increased by over 10%. So there is the potential there. The Nature Trust is not going to be the answer to it by itself, of course not. But we do think we can make an impact at real scale. And I suppose it's important to say we've set this up as because we believe this is a missing piece of the jigsaw. We believe there's lots of interested funders out there, both organisations like AXA, other organisations, and individuals who are interested in creating native woodlands at scale. Our participation in this is creating a hub where they feel they can gain confidence to invest. We're also, you'll see from the video, working with private forestry companies. So in the second video you showed there, you showed SWS, fantastic private forestry company who found and planted that first site with us, and we're working with a range of other private forestry companies. So this is really a hub to create native woodlands that we're helping to manage and support, but it'll take a range of actors to come together and do it because the scale of the challenge is so big.
You may notice actually that we keep saying native woodlands, we're not saying forest. What's the difference, Yvonne, between a native woodland and forest, and how is one different to the other?
So native woodland is a variety of different species that you expect to attract more native biodiversity into it because you're trying to recreate these healthy, restored ecosystems. Forest is a generic term for all kinds of treed landscapes. So a forest could be, a monoculture of Sitka spruce, for example, which is not a native species, but which is a very useful timber species. And with these native woodlands, we're looking to create diverse ecosystems that can provide multiple ecosystem services, not just timber. They won't be used for timber. They'll be in situ for a long time. But they're doing all those other jobs for us, like regulating water and nutrients and carbon, and those climate regulating services as well. And it's just brilliant to see the carbon and biodiversity pieces come together and to talk about the ability of native woodlands to do both jobs, to support our biodiversity and at the same time do something good for the climate by pulling carbon out of the atmosphere.
John, if there are businesses tuning in, potential investors who would like to find out a bit more or get involved with the Nature Trust, what should they do?
The best thing to do is to visit our website, naturetrust.ie, and get in touch with us there with any queries. There's some videos that you saw today, and then there's other content. There's an investment memorandum and other documentation we can share with interested parties. I think it's really important to reiterate what Yvonne was saying there, just around the amount of time that this is kind of managed for. So we have a commitment to report on every forest that we plant or woodland that we plant for 25 years. So this is never going to be clear felled. This is not a commercial forest. This is a native woodland. And we will be reporting on the progress of every site annually for 25 years to every funder who participates in that. But we're also contractually bound to manage that forest for 100 years. So I may well be...
What do you mean by manage a forest? To let people know what kind of work goes into managing these woodlands?
Again, Kieran is probably the person to answer that, but again...
A lot.
but there's more than I would be able to answer on that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it. In the initial period until the forest is established, it involves really intensive management because the saplings that you saw are quite small and they're competing with surrounding vegetation for light and nutrients and water and so on. When the canopy closes, they begin to dominate and they outcompete the surrounding vegetation. So that really, the forest is established. But you indefinitely need to manage these forests from the point of view of forest health. Also, invasive species, as Yvonne mentioned, and these are going to be open to the public for use. So we have issues around just maintaining trails and looking after them. So. And from time to time, you do have problems with pests and diseases, and wind blow is going to become an issue in the future. It is now, but more so with climate change. So there's a long tail to this, and but we have structured it in such a way that we fund it and invest in the creation of the native woodlands and maintain a sinking fund for the long-term maintenance of them thereafter.
And John, as you had said, that investors will get regular reports on the health and well-being of their native woodlands, but they can visit them too.
Yes, before they're actually open to the public, because we don't open them until they're mature, because we want to prevent the kind of damage that Kieran has talked about, the introduction of pests and whatnot. So they're kind of closed off to protect them while they mature. But even during that period, we can bring down team events, team building days out, go and see the site, and really see the on the ground results of the investment with your own eyes.
Well, that's great. You've heard it all here. Anyone interested, it's the naturetrust.ie.
Just naturetrust.ie.
Naturetrust.ie. But I'd like to thank all of our panel for joining us, and I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. And I think we're all experts on the need for native woodlands. And as you were saying, if ever it was, it's never as urgent as it is now. And I think over the next few years in particular, we will be hearing about the need for this. So there's a part of a solution here anyway. So I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Again, thanks to our panel and naturetrust.ie.